just need to get my hat. This is the hat I wear when I walk with the veterans in the 4th of July parade. It's the hat, USS Nathaniel Greene, SSBN 636, a Polaris missile-carrying nuclear submarine. Back in the late 60s, I served as her supply officer. So I want to tell you 2 quick stories from my Navy days. The first is, right after I was commissioned as an ensign, United States Naval Reserve Supply Corps, they sent me off to Athens, Georgia, to Supply Corps School, where I was to learn just what it was that supply officers did on the ship. And the supply officer had several different responsibilities. One of them, the one, of course, you know me, I really got into, was feeding the crew. So I went to commissary class the first day with great anticipation, learning how I was going to do this on a I didn't know it was going to be a submarine at the time, but on a ship. So the instructor walks in and he says, "Gentlemen, I'm going to write 3 words on this board. If you sleep through the rest of the class, take these words with you." And he turned and he wrote, "Food is morale." Food is morale. Oh, wow. Seems kind of obvious, but I'll keep those words in mind. So I guess I did okay with that. Because about 2 years later, I was on the submarine. We were in our 30-day refit, getting it ready to go on our 70-day underwater patrol. And at the last week, we do 4 days of sea trials, where we go out and make sure everything's been fixed correctly, make sure that we know how to operate the boat again. And on these sea trials, we've always had these freeloaders. They were officers who came down from Washington to Charleston, or they are in the squadron there in Charleston. And the quirk of the Navy pay system, officers got a base pay plus a subsistence allowance, which is meant to feed you and your family. Well, if the Navy is feeding you on the ship, then that's not fair, so you get to pay for your meals. It was the princely sum of $1.35 a day for 3 meals. Actually, it was 4 meals because we did midnight rations too, back in 1968, 69. So I always charged these freeloaders who were just riding and sleeping in our beds and all that other stuff for their meals. I was not going to let them off the hook. One time I had an admiral come down from Washington, and the whole rest of the wardroom was looking at me and saying, "Does Steve have the guts to charge this admiral for his meals?" And I said, "Of course I will." I walked up to the admiral and I said, "Admiral, you owe me $5.40 for the last 4 days' worth of meals." And he looked at me and he said, "Son," he said, "I'll be glad to pay that. So I'm going back to Washington. I'm going to tell him I was riding with Nathaniel Greene, and she's a feeder." Oh my goodness, she's a feeder? The highest compliment you could pay a supply officer in the Navy, running the crew's mess and the officer's mess there, to say she's a feeder. Man, did that make my day. It was just glorious. Let me take this off a minute. Now, you're probably sitting there wondering why I would want to tell you those 2 stories about my time in the Navy. Well, I think because it reveals something you probably or may know about me already, that I like to serve. That's why I'm a deacon. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have remained a deacon. And I took that job of feeding the crew more than as a job. I took it as a chance to serve. I had an opportunity to influence the morale of that crew, to influence the performance of that boat. And I took that very seriously. So as I came through this morning and I looked at the gospel reading, here is Mary and Martha. You know Martha, don't you? What does it say about Martha? You just heard me read it. How many words does she get? Martha, servant. Service and Martha, always equated. I can get in touch with my Martha side very easily. But as I started thinking about this sermon, I said, maybe that really doesn't tell us very much about Martha. Is there more to Martha than that? Martha and Mary appear 3 stories. They're all short, so it won't take me very long to review them all. Let's go back in time a little bit. As Jesus is moving along the road earlier in his life, in Luke, he tells us that they continued their travel and Jesus entered a village. A woman by the name of Martha welcomed him and made him feel quite at home. She had a sister, Mary, who sat before the Master, hanging on every word he said. But Martha was pulled away by all she had to do in the kitchen. Later, she stepped in and interrupted them. Master, don't you care that my sister has abandoned the kitchen to me? Tell her to lend me a hand. The Master said, Martha, dear Martha, you're fussing far too much and getting yourself worked up over nothing. One thing only is essential. It's the main course. And Mary has chosen it. And it won't be taken from her. So yes, Martha is fussing in the kitchen, the servant. We start to learn a little bit more about Mary. Another story about Martha that I want to share is in John, just a few days, probably maybe not more than a couple of days before the story that we heard today, we have the death of Lazarus and his raising from the dead. You know that story, the general outline. Jesus was far off. He dilly-dallied and took his time to come, and by the time he got there, Lazarus had been dead and buried. And as he's coming, the sisters see him coming. Now, who went out to meet? One of them ran out to meet Jesus. Who would that be? Would it be Mary? I see some heads. Martha heard Jesus was coming and went out to meet him. Whoops! Martha. Mary remained in the house. And then this exchange, which tells us more about Martha than anything else we've read. Martha said, Master, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now I know that whatever you ask God, he will give you. Jesus said, your brother will be raised up. Martha replied, I know. He will be raised up at the resurrection at the end of time. And Jesus replies, you don't have to wait for the end. I am right now, resurrection and life. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. Everyone who lives believing in me will not ultimately die. Martha, do you believe this? And Martha replies, yes, Master. All along I have believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who comes into the world. Wow. An impressive couple of sisters, aren't they? Mary and Martha. Martha, who makes this proclamation of faith way before some of the disciples get it. It's amazing. Look at this story. Look at the roles of the people. Martha, in the story we have today, is serving. But we know that just a few days ago she had made that proclamation of faith, and that she really did get it. Mary continues consistently in her role. What was she doing the first story? One from Luke. Sitting at Jesus' feet, hanging on his every word. And Jesus is telling Martha, if you're going to get it, you're going to get it like Mary gets it. There's only one essential thing. Being and believing in me. You heard that echoed in the Philippians passage that Jim read. What was Paul doing at the beginning? I'm born a Jew, circumcised on the 8th day, Pharisee, blameless under law. He's laying out his resume. He sounds like Martha. I do these things. And then immediately after that he blows it off. And he said, but it means nothing. I count that all as loss, for I press on to the one thing that's important, being in Christ. Now in this story, Mary has a different role than listening. Mary is serving, is she not? She's taking this costly jar of ointment, breaking it open, and rubbing Jesus' feet with it. We've been told many times that, and I've seen it when I was there in Bethany, people traveled on foot. It was rocky, it was dusty. And you know what the first thing anybody did when you walked into their house? What would the servants do? What were those jars of water for? Washing your feet. So presumably Jesus' feet had been washed, but maybe they weren't in such good shape from all the travel. Anybody here besides me have feet that get very dry in this low humidity up here? And I have to take care of them. I have to put lotion on them. So Mary is serving Jesus. Not just listening to him, but serving him. And look at Jesus. What role does he play here? The one who came not to be served, but to serve, is being served. He's allowing himself to be served, and he's even defending that in the face of Judas' criticism. The only other character we need to flesh out here a little bit is Mr. Judas. Now, I'm going to tell you that this anointing story appears in all 4 Gospels, and John is the only one who names any of these people. Martha doesn't exist. Mary is a woman who's a sinner. The complainers are the disciples, or several other people in the room. So let's give Judas just a little bit of a break here. Judas represents the skeptic, the person who can't believe or has trouble believing. Brooks just told us the other week when he preached, what's the difference between Peter and Judas? They're both very much the same, except Peter was able to believe, Judas was not. So we have these characters in this little play here, this little vignette. There's just so much in there. And do you see any sort of rhythm to this circularity of it? Go back to the hymn. What's the first line of the hymn we just sang? Brother, sister, let me be your servant. Second line, let me be as Christ to you. How can I be a servant and be as Christ to you if I don't know who Christ is and have the faith of believing in him and I spend time with him? I can't be if Christ is somebody else if I don't know what that means. And the third line, pray that I might have the grace to let you be my servant too. We were on a Texas mission trip. Some of our folks are sitting right over here. We sang this song at the service when they commissioned us down there and sent us out. We were staying in a beautiful ranch. Our meals were being prepared by people from that church. And some people on the trip were saying, is this really a mission trip? It's a complete mission trip. These people need to be of service too. We need to have the grace to let them serve us. I was ecstatic. I got to go work in the field in the day and come back and not have to fix meals. Even though I would have willingly done that. So time to sit back and be served. You see the circle? We move from one role. Even Jesus moved into the role of being served. I've shared with you some things from the author David De Silva, this book that I've been reading. He's a great New Testament scholar. And he paints a picture of the world of Jesus in the first early Christian church. He tries to talk about the Greco-Roman culture, examine it in some detail, and then say, how would the people in that situation have heard the message of God, the message of Jesus? One of the elements he talks about is patronage was important. As was just said a week or two ago, in that world you're either rich or poor. So patronage is important. The rich have an obligation to the poor, to be generous to them. In doing so, they gained honor and respect, which was all part of that Greek culture. So they were rich, and they were giving to the poor. Maybe they gave you a loan, or not a loan, but gave you some money to start a small business that would take you just a little bit away from that subsistence level of poverty. Or maybe you had your crop wiped out last year and you really needed grain, and you really were destitute. So they could give you some money to help you with that. But there was an equal expectation of a gracious response. And the most gracious response you could start with would be to tell everybody who your patron was. This is no anonymous giving time. You gave that person more honor and respect by telling other people who had given you this great gift. And perhaps you would be motivated then, if you just got a little bit further away from that poverty level, to be generous to someone else. De Silva takes that and says, God is our benefactor, our patron. God's grace is given to us, and He is hoping, desiring a gracious response from us. At a very minimum, we should honor and praise God. And maybe that takes us all further away around the circle to where we feel like serving someone else. extending God's love to someone else. De Silva makes the point that the circle of grace is beautiful when it's unbroken. It's like a dance, and the dance goes on. But if the circle of grace is broken, the dance breaks down and it's not such a beautiful thing. Did you know, just a week ago, Friday night, there was a Scottish ceilidh in Vail. Ceilidh is Gaelic for party. There's always singing, there's always dancing, there's always music. At this ceilidh, there's a fellow from Eagle who came from Edinburgh. And he had the music and he knew how to teach the ceilidh dances that Karen and I have been doing for years. But I haven't done them in like 10 years. And so we danced every dance until we went home a little bit before the party ended because we were exhausted, being as old as we are. I think we've been dancing for about 3 hours. I know I did strip the willow 3 times. If you know strip the willow, I didn't know I could do strip the willow 3 times in one day. But my favorite dance was the Dashing White Sergeant. And it's a set dance, but it's all around the room. So here I am in the center, and Karen's on this side, and Jen Woolley is on the other side, and we're facing 3 people. That's our set of 6. And then behind them is another set of 6, and all the way around the room. And you do the dance, and at the end of the dance, you go forward, and you pass through that group, and get another group of 3 people, and start the dance all over again. The dance starts 6 hands round the back. So it's a big circle of a set of 6. And we're dancing 8 bars round and 8 bars back. And I looked over my shoulder during one of that, all of these circles all the way around this room. Probably a room about as big as this. It must have been a dozen circles, sets of people. Certainly, it was just so beautiful. Everybody in time to the music. And that's what De Silva is trying to say. Our Christian life, our life as a Christian community is like. When we're all in the dance, in the circle, it's a beautiful thing. But when people are breaking the circle, it's not such a beautiful thing. Now, let me tell you why I chose this sermon, this way to approach this. As I entered Lent this year, I knew I could get in touch with my Martha side. I was feeling that I was neglecting the Mary side. Things were pulling me away from time in prayer or reflection or reading. I had a stack of really nice books I really wanted to read, and I just wasn't getting to anything. So I made a conscious effort this Lent to spend more time at that and to be much more conscious of experiencing God's presence and getting in touch with my Mary. Let the Martha side go for a while. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be easy. As Pastor Mark said when we were talking about this, yeah, it's easy to come here on Thursday night and spend a couple hours serving. It's much harder finding time to do the Mary stuff, to do the being close to Christ stuff. But they're both so important. And so I want to close with 3 questions for you. Let me get my hat. Which hat were you wearing when you first came into church? Was it one of these hats, your service hat? If I go to church, they'll help me, connect me with somebody I can help, and I really need to serve somebody. Was it your Mary hat? I need to find Christ. I need to get closer to God. I need to learn more. Perhaps it was your Jesus hat, at least in Jesus' role in this story. I'm broken and I'm hurting. I need to be served. I want to go to church. I want somebody to listen to me and to serve me. Or maybe it was the Judas hat, or the disciple hat. Let's call it that. I don't know about this Christian faith stuff, but I'll go to church and maybe they'll teach me something, or maybe I'll hear something that'll make me believe, or maybe they'll say something that is kind of more the way that I see. I think God should be like this, and they tell me about that God, and I'll be happy. Which hat did you come with? Second question. Are you still wearing the same hat? If so, why? Do you need to move to a different hat? be in the circle, in the dance, but if you're standing still, it's not going to work very well. You've got to be moving to be fully in the dance. So the third question is, what changes would you need to make? What reallocations of time, what different activities do you need to make to be fully engaged in the circle of the dance, the circle of grace? To maybe take off that service hat, as I was trying to do, and get a little closer to the Mary side. Or maybe come away from the Mary side and put on a hat, get out and do something to serve.